Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another Conversations with Amoda. Let's jump straight in, Amoda. Today, we are going to be exploring, unpacking all things to do with the ego mechanism, to do with hopefully in some way shedding light on the misunderstandings, the myths, all these spiritual ideas about what the ego is, how we assume, many of us at least, that it's some thing, some entity, almost entity that we have to get rid of. So generally, shining a light. Kind of areas we're hoping to cover are what is the ego really, why it feels so convincing, why trying to get rid of the ego is a futile attempt, seeing through the ego versus fighting the ego, what the ego might have to do after awakening. So a whole plethora of kind of areas. The question of the ego is almost one of the perennial questions on the spiritual path. And one can, I certainly know you, Amoda, are constantly being asked and offering work, teachings, etc., on this very, very subject. So one can never untangle and shine the light enough. So, having said that, I am going to ask you to shed some light on, let's say, what the ego is really. I don't need to say anything more than that. Let's just explore.
Well, we could say what it's not. Let's start there. In common language, people say, my ego, they refer to my ego as if it's something that exists, a solid entity like the brain, or as if it's located somewhere. My ego, something that I have. So we create an object out of it. And this is misleading in the sense that it leads to many assumptions. Because if we have an ego, my ego, that belongs to me, and it's obviously sometimes or always seemingly a problem, especially for a spiritual seeker, for a spiritual person, the ego seems to be the one that creates the problems of reactivity, or the problems of victimhood, or the problems of superiority or inferiority or whatever. Or the ego is equated with the mind and thinking, and so on. So as an object, and an object that we don't want, or perhaps even like a disease of some kind, we want to get rid of it. Yes, we want to, get rid of it, cut it out, kill it, or fix it, or something. So I'm just saying all this because these are some of the hidden assumptions when we speak of my ego. So untangling it to actually really examine what it is very valuable, because it sort of de-solidifies and demythologizes, so that then the approach is quite different to the unexamined approach to ego. So what is it really when we examine it? Well, first of all, we can't locate it anywhere. It's not actually in the brain. It's not in the head. Rather, so it's not an organ of some sort. Rather, it's an activity. It's an activity of mind or an activity of self. It's not the whole of mind. Like I said, for some, ego is equated with mind and thinking, but that's not the case. Mind and thinking are valuable functions of the human organism. But it's an activity of mind, a particular activity, a specific activity of mind or self. And it's that activity that we're invited to examine. So what is that activity? It's the activity essentially of resistance to what is. It's the activity of naming and labeling and then comparing that with what we want or don't want. In other words, it's the constant interpreting of our experience that then creates interference with our experience. So it's an activity of an aspect of mind, a part of mind, or a part of self. For many people, that activity is unconscious, habitual, and then becomes the source of suffering, because resistance is suffering. When we resist, we tighten against our experience, we contract against our experience, we try to control our experience, we try to change it, fix it, run away from it, or bypass it in some way through distraction or numbing or suppression or avoidance or denial. So all these activities are a sort of conglomerate of mental and emotional movements in response to what we feel, in response to what we experience. And it's that activity that seems to create a thing called ego, but it's not a thing. So in that sense, if it's an activity, it's not actually a thing. It's not solid. So it's not a matter of, maybe I'm jumping ahead a bit now, but it's not a matter of getting rid. You can't get rid of something that's not a thing. But you can start to see clearly that activity. And once seen, we then have various possibilities in how we respond to our experience.
There's so much in this conversation, because the self, the conditioned self, the whole architecture of the self includes this, what you've actually called before, and we call a mechanism, the mechanism. And the self is almost predicated on this egoic mechanism, which has a healthy functionality. Can you speak to that? Because as you say, it's not, the idea of it being an enemy is not very valuable in many ways, and yet it does filter into the human, the spiritual experience, because we somehow see that the ego is connected to the source of suffering, whether it's directly or not directly. So obviously, if that's the source of suffering, then I need to get rid of it. And yet ego serves somehow as well.
If you see again, it depends on how we define ego, and it's a little bit of a continuum. It's on a continuum. Some individuals and some spiritual teachers and teachings may refer to the ego really very much as that activity which is constantly rejecting or grasping experience. And therefore there is the source of suffering, yes, the inability to stay present with what is without reaching forwards or running away from or shrinking back from, and so on. It's also, ego can be referred to as part of the persona, the mask that we wear in order to look good, in order to be approved of, in order to be seen in a certain way. So it depends on how the word ego is used. On a more, I would say, broader and perhaps more valuable definition, if we're referring to ego as that functional capacity to navigate form, the world of form, to differentiate between left and right, to differentiate between night and day, to differentiate between this body and the truck coming down the street, then that function of interpretation, labeling, describing, and assessing is valuable. So we could say there's a functional sense of self.
Yeah.
Of course, that's valuable, and that's something that can actually never be erased until we die. As long as we're alive, there is a functional sense of self. The problem, if you like, is that that functional sense of self gets mixed in with the psychological sense of self, which is the belief that I am a separate entity that exists independently of other separate entities. And psychologically, I have to defend myself, protect myself, compare myself, and all those, if you like, non-functional psychological aspects. When the sense of self becomes mixed up with that, then we're very identified with ourselves as my body, my mind, my whatever it is, whatever I possess, the qualities of my personality. And that erroneous sense of identity is what creates a sense of disconnection or alienation, or the need to perform, or the need to survive, or the need to whatever it might be. And that becomes dysfunctional. So there's a functional sense of self, and there's a dysfunctional sense of self, which for the majority of people has become just the way we are as human beings, but actually it's dysfunctional. The spiritual seeker is seeking to go beyond that. And I don't mean dysfunctional in the sense of the personality, but the if you like, place, dimension from which we operate in life. When we operate from that sense of being a separate self and identifying with that, drawing our identity from that, then we are in a sort of push and pull with life, a resistance and a grasping. And resistance is what creates the separate sense of self. And resistance in this sense is the refusal to meet what is as open awareness. So then wrapping a narrative, this shouldn't be happening. I don't want to feel this. I shouldn't be feeling this. This shouldn't be happening. All of this creates an inner tension and a restlessness, an inner agitation.
As you're speaking, I feel that, you know, the me, the sense of self, and the ego mechanism. Can I call it mechanism? Yeah, just for this purpose. The sense of self, or the separate self, and the mechanism of ego are inextricably woven together in many ways, and without you, we can talk about, not us, but people can talk about dealing with my ego endlessly, but unless the sense of a separate self is examined in some way, of which the ego mechanism is maybe a part, unless that happens, we are chasing an imaginary thing without really looking from a true angle. As Alan Watts, somebody said this a couple of weeks ago, the self trying to sort the self out, which is actually also the ego, let's say, trying to sort the ego self out, is like an arrow, trying to fire at itself. It's impossible. It's impossible. And so what I'm asking you is, the true examination is not just a philosophical question or about what the ego is, but actually, if you really want to get down to it, then you have to examine the separate self, the idea of a fixed me who has a damn ego in the first place.
That's right. Absolutely. Yes. It boils down to the question, who am I?
Yes.
It's a question of identity. Identity informs perception, and perception informs behavior. Whether we are reactive, whether we shrink, whether we deny, whether we suppress, whether we overpower, whether we attempt to control and manipulate life, our experience. So yes, absolutely, we need to go to the root rather than looking for the ego or trying to get rid of the ego. First of all, to understand, and then to start seeing that mechanism, that activity taking place. And then through that, we start to examine, well, who am I? Not who am I as another identity, but what am I? What is my essential nature? What is my essence? What is the essence? And that can only be known not only by asking the question, but by looking within. And looking within will entail looking at the activity that we call ego. We don't even have to name it as ego. It's just an activity of resistance, rejection, interpreting, interfering with our experience.
Yeah. I think I was talking about it not today, but before in a video somewhere, was talking about it in terms of the movement away from and the movement towards. Because and partly I talk about that because the seeking mind, the restless mind, is again predicated on the moving away from and the moving towards, because maybe psychologically or somehow it fears its own death because it can't actually exist in the very moment that we're in.
That's right. The resting in now is the end of that activity. And if it's the end of that activity, in that moment, the ego identity comes undone.
So it's past and future.
Yes. That aspect of mind which has that activity of movement is, if you like, reaching into the future. It's reaching into the next moment, as if this moment isn't enough, or there's a discomfort in just being totally here. And it's not about the self being present, and it's not about the self stopping all thinking. Again, this is an error, and what you were pointing to earlier about the self trying to fix the self, or the ego trying to fix the ego, or mind trying to fix mind. That's not really it's not going to lead anywhere.
So is awareness the only answer?
Well, yes, although that has its layers of understanding, if you like, as it filters in. Again, if we speak of awareness, for many people that means focusing on something, being aware of something. That's still a horizontal dimension. The realization of awareness as the open space within which all activity takes place, within which all movement takes place, but in itself is open, still, and fully present and intimate. There isn't anything else. That has to be the journey. That's the journey of discovery or revelation.
Is there a I'm wondering about the I mean, I think you've kind of described it in a way, the mechanism of mind. Is this the result of conditioning ultimately? And I just would like to touch on the emotional part of it. I don't want to get involved in it too much, but I'm just still trying to shine a light on it, because I think you and I speak about this a lot. But for people who are listening, just to keep on breaking into it a little bit. How has it come into being?
Well, that I can't possibly, unless it's a theoretical answer. I'm sure.
Well,
it's been
I'm happy
about,
with it.
I don't know how it's come into existence. Why are we formed in this way? Why is there an entwinement of functional self with psychological self? I can't possibly know that. Part of our evolutionary process. Perhaps it's part of the way of pointing us back home. Without getting, if you like, lost or obscure. If true nature isn't obscure, then there'd be nothing to find. And maybe that's one of our purposes, is to discover that which we originally are.
It does seem kind of, before we move on, it does seem kind of strange in a way, because let's say 99.9% of people are completely locked in to the self and to the egoic mechanism. That is the way of things, for better or worse, whether it's tortuous or fantastic, whether it's aggrandized or a victim. It's all the same mechanism playing itself out, and yet there have been teachers, masters, spiritual people, ordinary people, and great masters who've been able to see just through this veil, to see that there is a way, or there is a possibility of actually seeing that mechanism, seeing that at work. I still don't quite understand why. It's not utterly convincing, because when you really see it, and I certainly see the mechanism at work, it brings this sense of a different reality. You're sort of almost moved into a different reality where you're seeing things that you were stuck to. You see the stickiness of the whole thing, the assumption of that reality that is shown to be false. Not false in a bad way, but just as a dream.
Are you asking why
I'm
is
asking, yeah.
the majority of humanity in a dream?
Well, I think because things are so moving around so much these days, and because on so many different levels, there is a sense of climacticness to the movement of the human situation. I don't know how best to put it. In all different areas of life, and there is definitely a revelation of the egoic mechanism going on. Yes. So
You mean, why did we get lost in the first place?
why did we get lost?
Well, again,
Why
I
are we
can't
so
possibly...
lost in ourselves? What is this narcissistic sort of momentum?
Well, we can relate it to the movement of the yugas, but I don't know how valuable that is. Right? When we've identified, human individuals have identified with form, have identified with this body, and then have identified with survival of this body, and have identified with this body against other bodies, fighting for survival. And there's no real inner, I would say that humanity's gone through a long period of time where there hasn't been really deep inner reflection, maybe for a few rare individuals. That's part of the movement of the cycles of the yuga. There may be other cycles that we're moving into where we are beginning to wake up to true nature, and maybe there's a momentum for that, or at least a certain movement towards that, probably over thousands and thousands of years. Why are there even yugas or cycles? That is the unanswerable, and there's probably cosmologists and those that understand or see into the movements of the galaxies and the universes and the times that can speak to that. I'm not sure I'm the right person to speak to it as such,
but
other than a very gentle, intuitive understanding of that.
Yeah, because your emphasis is more not on the speculative, but actually on the, what would you say, on the detail, on the
direct experience.
The direct experience.
On the availability of seeing now, the availability of discovering true nature now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that. And yeah, well, it's good, but I want to move on to this. I want us to know what that means, the direct experience means. I also want to know what happens with for people after the glimpse, and I want to talk a bit about abiding in. Yeah. Because there are two versions of the similar thing, and I think they all relate together. The direct felt sense. Should we talk first about what you were talking about with the direct sense? The direct. You don't use the word
direct
sense.
path.
Yeah.
The direct path is, first of all, the undoing of the idea that freedom is only, or self-realization is, or awakening is determined by spiritual practice and time and being good enough, earning your spiritual brownie points, having practiced enough, having understood enough, having gathered enough spiritual knowledge, having been on the path for whatever length of time, and or having developed a better spiritual self, again, these are hidden assumptions. That's called a progressive path. I once went to speak at a particular ashram, and it really hit me very strongly how much and how many people were really entrenched in the belief that the liberation, the freedom from suffering that they were seeking would come only after reciting a certain number of spiritual scriptures, and that they would progress through various levels. And this was, it was really like a sort of smack in the face. It was so dense. So that belief is very much entrenched in spirituality, a lot of spirituality. But the direct path isn't really another path that replaces it as such. It's not really a path. It's really a pathless path. It's the discovery of what is here now, which doesn't require years or lifetimes of practice, progress, and so on. It does require clear seeing. It does require surrender. It does require, surrender of the mechanism that we're speaking of. It does require a falling open, and so on. But that doesn't come because of years and years of practice, or methodology, or understanding, or reading, or knowledge, because it doesn't happen to the self. It's the undoing of the self, and that's available to every human being. It's not dependent on circumstance or education or culture or even beliefs. It's got nothing to do with beliefs. And much of the progressive path, if not all of it, is dependent on beliefs. It fosters, adopting certain ideologies. This is the direct path. It cuts through ideology. And it's very available to every single human being because it's our natural state.
So when you say direct path, you mean a direct meeting with what is, this moment, and then this moment, and then this moment, and then this moment, which doesn't deny the gradual undoing of the veils of perception, but it's in a different framework from seeing that, the self has to engage with this over a long period of time in order to get somewhere. So it's a complete radical shift in the way of relating and what we're relating from. Is that right?
Yes, it doesn't negate what we experience as the gradual falling away of layers of perception that were clouding, obscuring true nature. So yes, there's a certain gradualness for most people. That is inevitable because the individuation lives in the world of time and space.
Yes.
Having said that, yes, so it's direct in the sense that it doesn't require all these other conditions, and can be recognized in the moment. The abiding of it can be gradual. Yeah. On the other hand, there are individuals in which it's been not gradual. Yeah.
You mean it's been sudden and then abiding?
Yes.
Well, not because the other thing that we do have to we talk about a lot with people is in a direct experience, let's say, to see, to glimpse, to know, to recognize, and then there's the coming and going, the coming and going, the coming and going, seemingly coming and going, which is why I talked about the glimpse and what happens. Because the glimpse is very useful, but also is something that can be hijacked by the self.
Yes, but for most people, there's a glimpse at some point, and then the glimpse seems to disappear from view.
So
and
let's
that's the
just
coming
talk a
and
little
going.
bit about, let's just talk about what to, because a lot of those people have actually, are after their glimpse taking the path, their journey, their life very, very seriously. They're on a serious path by that time. I use the word path lightly, but there can be a perennial ping-ponging, coming and going. What to say to that?
When a glimpse takes place, it's as if the veils have been parted, whether that's something that takes place in meditation, in deep meditation, or a moment of silence, of beauty, or some other situation. Very often, it seems the self seems to, for a moment or a few moments or whatever, it's as if the self has stopped being at the center, being the center. The center's come undone. And when the center comes undone, there's nobody here to narrate the experience back to the self, which is the default position. There's no self-referencing. It's like the sky is simply the sky. The sky isn't reporting upon its perception of the sky back to itself. It simply is itself.
Nicely
Right?
said. Yeah. It's not the sky talking to itself.
Yeah. So that gives, as a human being, it gives a sense in that moment or few moments or whatever, such a sense of freedom, such a sense of liberation, such a sense of peace or joy or beauty or light. It's the light of being has revealed itself, because the self that is self-referencing and taking up a position at the center of its apparent reality has simply come undone. So the light of being shines through, light of being. So then the lightness of being comes through. So we feel light. Now that's not an elevated situation. It's not a supernatural situation. It's simply the lightness of being, which is our natural, innocent, innate state. And then the self reforms itself, and it comes in and it either tries to understand that experience or put it into context or compare it or try to seek it or hold on to it. That's the I got it, I lost it syndrome, which is so common. And that's very, like I say, natural in some way on the path. But it's at that point that the invitation becomes more profound, more
demanding.
Perhaps demanding is not quite the right word. Serious, but that's also not quite right.
Sincere.
It's all sincere. That's what it's really there that the journey begins. It's not the glimpse itself. It's the journey begins. And what is that journey? Well, then the journey is not to keep on trying to recreate that experience, that glimpse. It's not to identify with it, but to actually start to notice in everyday life where the self, and that's the activity of the ego, where the self is interpreting its experience. So when it's an elevated or open or light experience, or there's another glimpse, whether it's a gentle one or a profound one, it will identify with that. And then if it's an unwelcome experience, a difficult emotion, a circumstance that makes us feel uncomfortable or intense emotionally, then we're identifying with that and saying that shouldn't be happening, I shouldn't be feeling this, and the more spiritual we are, the less I should be feeling this. And here we are back in the ping-ponging. So the activity will play itself out. That's the activity of the self, the mechanism of the self, that movement away from and towards. It's at that point, and that's what I mean by more sincere or more serious or more profound, the invitation becomes, because it's at that point that it stops being a matter of whether we have a glimpse or not, but a matter of how we respond to what is here.
Wow, yeah.
And that's the path of surrender. Not the surrender to anything, but a surrender of that mechanism. And whilst it may seem that the self is doing that, it's not about the self doing surrender. It's an invitation to die. It's an invitation to stop. It's an invitation to soften. It's an invitation to soften the gaze upon what is. And that's where the real journey begins. That's the pathless path, because it's not like A takes you to B. It's in the now, 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 until there's no self left. And then it appears to be sudden. Then it appears to be abiding. Because the whole momentum of the self and its activity, or the ego, call it what you will, comes undone. It's like it comes to it runs out of steam. It runs out of incentive.
Amen. Well, it does run out of steam because it requires attention, and when it doesn't get that attention, or a word you've used a lot in the past, allegiance, when it's seen, then
I mean, for some people, this is a whole lifetime's journey. It's not a progressive path, but it is something that becomes your genuine longing. And that's fine. It doesn't have to result in any particular destination. For myself, it came to a certain point in my life where it's for whatever reason, I don't know, karmic or luck or grace, whatever, I saw that mechanism, and not only did I see it in this individuation, but it was like the whole of humanity's momentum was seen. Again, not conceptually, but just through myself. It's like the whole of humanity was playing itself out. The whole of this existence, and if there are lifetimes, I felt like lifetimes of this momentum had totally played themselves out. And in that seeing, in that moment, it was almost a choiceless choice, but there was some volition in it. It just stopped. Was it me stopping it? Was it grace that simply it came to an end? I really can't answer that. It's probably both. They're probably intertwined. At that point, the question becomes meaningless. But it was like, I remember having a very slight thought that was like, how many lifetimes am I going to be doing this? How many lifetimes am I going to give allegiance to the movement of the mind just because I'm uncomfortable with what is here? Deeply uncomfortable. Yeah. How many lifetimes and how many cycles of humanity have given allegiance to this? It's like the whole thing just went. Now, I don't know exactly why that happened then, but it did. So what I'm saying is, it doesn't have to be all-encompassing in that way. It can be.
Well, no,
but for some, it's an ongoing journey.
I'm a case in point. I mean, how many years or how long was it after that happened to you, that I showed up like a miracle in your existence? Because I think you'd cleared the way ready for me. That was my theory.
Yes, it was about 2 years after that.
It was like a year and a half, 2 years.
Well, actually, less than 2 years. Yeah,
It
about a
was less
year,
than
actually.
2 years. I'd already
Yeah.
started floating around
Yeah.
like a moth around the candle. But then the point being, it's so beautiful to hear you speak of this, that then obviously, as somebody coming into your orbit with the profundity of that you just spoke to, well, then I'm going to ipso facto either be bounced off back into my life somewhere, or else I'm going to be invited to die. And so, I'm a testament to the other path in a way, which is the resolute path of turning up actually all the time, meeting the mechanism. It's followed me to America. It was here, it's there. It was until I became so tired of seeing something over and over that I realized that I was going to be haunted by the mechanism of my own mind forever, unless I, and when I say I, something was surrendered. I can't say that I surrendered it, but what I'm saying is that there was something different about my path to your path.
You see, it seems different. Everyone seems to have a different path in that sense.
Yeah.
But if we take time out of it,
yes,
it's the same.
Oh well, my God, are we going to? What if you take time out of everything you've done?
If you take time out of it,
that's a
what
very
seems to
cosmic
happen
statement.
in an instant and what seems to happen over time is actually the same. It's just that what I experienced happened in a nanosecond. But if you take that idea of the concept that it took this amount of time and that one took that amount of time, you collapse time, then it's the same, right? But the human experience is built on time. The perception of time. So, yeah. The mechanism is the same. The undoing is the same. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a direct path.
Yeah.
The invitation is the same. So it doesn't matter about time. It doesn't matter like, when am I going to awaken? When is it going to be abiding? Because these are all assumptions and expectations of the separate self that expects it to be different, expects myself to be different, that expects my life to be better because it happens now. And this is such an impediment to the true path.
Yes, I think that that touches on this thing of the spiritual ego that can quite easily come in and then take ownership of the glimpse and then say, now I've got something and now I'm, but actually have an innately difficult struggle with maintaining that kind of that sense of self. So that it speaks to that as well. And I think that one of the most important things to come out of this conversation is that glimpse or no glimpse, the direct path is not a progressive path, but it's not either just in this moment. It's actually the ongoing invitation to meet your experience directly, without the self taking ownership of it.
That's right. Yes, that's beautiful. So so it's taking the center out, but not having to do some process to take the center out. The center undoes itself.
And obviously, and I don't want to get into that, but if there's been a lifetime of investment in self and a lifetime of investment in ego structure and the assumption of who we are, then to start seeing clearly on the direct path the mechanism of who we have been and how much we've identified with something that is ultimately a fiction, that has a kind of implications and repercussions in one's life, because actually we're falling out of the dreamer into the reality, and that can be quite shocking, I think, for people. Have you found that? Not for yourself, because I know that you've gone
Well,
beyond.
I mean,
But yeah.
I mean, everyone starts wherever they are.
So there's no one
So-
size fits all here.
Absolutely
It's
not.
very-
I mean,
it's
you
very-
could say, for me, even though awakening took place 20 or 25 years after this particular situation that I'm going to touch on right now, that speaks to what you're saying.
Sure.
We are, it starts wherever it starts. And again, you can't just, it's not a linear process. It's not, you can't manufacture it in that way. It's not a formula. The beginning of that, if we really want to trace it back, and everyone can trace it back to somewhere of that which you talk about, is when in my very early 20s, I was on no spiritual path, but the path I was on, which was an academic achievement path, completely collapsed to such a degree. It brought in all aspects of my life, and they all collapsed, that identity was questioned.
Right.
Yeah, it was the collapse of my identity as whoever I thought I was. I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't examined it. I wasn't on a spiritual inquiry path. But that was the beginning, because it was the end of something I'd built myself on and my life on. And as it collapsed, it collapsed to such an extent that I had no ground. Now, yes, it had an impact on my life. Yes, it was terrifying. Yes, it was confusing. Yes, I ended up with absolutely nothing and almost literally on the streets. But it was the beginning of the journey of discovering that who I am is not dependent on my achievements, my success, my recognition or certificates or diplomas in the world, nor in anyone recognizing that, or I became nothing. I became a nobody. And whilst that was in some ways very challenging, it was also very freeing, and was the beginning of a journey of uncovering true nature, which finally culminated in some ways with awakening in 20 years later. But so I'm only speaking to that because, yes, it can be challenging, but it's not always that way. Not everyone has to go through a whole life collapse. But usually there is some kind of catalyst. It's very different these days. So many people are exposed to non-dual teachings. So many people have a deep longing to discover something, whether it comes from initially an intellectual, philosophical curiosity, whether it comes from the self that wants to be more spiritual or achieve something. There's always some entry point. So not everyone comes into it from a place of collapse of identity. At some point, whatever the doorway in, there has to be an examination, a true seeing of identity, and where we're attached to that, where we give our allegiance to that, where we derive our identity from the content of our experience, whether it's career or whatever roles we're playing in life, or the achievements we have, or the success we have, or the failures we have. And to start to disentangle that or undo that. So at some point that will be brought into view, but it doesn't have to start with an absolute collapse of an identity. It did for me, for whatever reason. Perhaps that's why.
Perhaps that's why
it then became a very radical awakening that we could say is abiding. because the identity had collapsed so much completely, apart from, I am this body, this person, and so on.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that at the end, because I was going to ask about that. Is it? It's not necessary. Of course, it's not necessary to have a broken sense of identity in one's past. Necessarily, for some it is, for some it's not.
Nothing is a precondition. Nothing. There is no, it has to be this way. Everyone is where they're at. And you start from there. If the doorway opens, if the longing opens to truly know yourself, if suffering has been seen, psychological suffering, whether it's just mental activity or reactivity or all of this has been seen and it's come to a sort of peak within yourself, then the journey begins.
It's just that I think that some reach a level of kind of inner suffering, whatever the cause is. For instance, and I don't like to talk about other teachers, but Eckhart Tolle said he was, he was sick of himself. There was an absolute end of the line that he'd reached with himself that meant that something happened. Now, maybe it's because he's a kind of quirky Aquarian, such as yourself. But you see, when I speak to you now, and when people speak to you now, you're very together. You're very eloquent. You're very organized. Your mind is clear. Your emotions are flowing. The whole architecture is super organized in many ways, and yet you come from this, really, quite a wounded ancestry, the family line, the family chain, and then the collapse of the self, the psychological self, the whole debacle that happened with your PhD, the being lost in the wilderness, all of these kind of things. It's I don't know what I'm kind of asking. Is there a and yet, well, you get Rupert Spira, who doesn't seem to have gone through that fire, but
it doesn't
I'm just throwing things around.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. We are where we are. Everyone has their own trajectory. Eckhart's was his trajectory, and there was some suffering through his past. I don't know the exact details, but there were some childhood wounds and so on, and a history of depression and so on. Perhaps similar to mine. I had a history of depression and academia, and I think he did. And then there's others who don't have that level of suffering. Yeah. And yet something falls away. I don't think suffering is a necessity. The suffering can be on the level. The suffering can be on the level of, a broken life, a wounded life, like mine was chaotic and traumatized and blah, blah. It can be on that level. But there can also be a seeing of the more subtle movement of mind that creates suffering. And I would hazard a relatively informed guess that Rupert will have had some of that. He would have seen the movement of mind in himself, even in his non-dramatic life, if that's the case, whereas mine was very dramatic. So it's not the content of our lives that we need to be looking at. It's what the mechanism is. And for whatever reason, he arrived at a place where that came undone. Eckhart, it came undone. In me, it came undone. So there's no precursor. There's no precondition. Yeah, the suffering that was experienced in this life informs a humanity, and also informs the wisdom and compassion to say, to offer, to guide, to support those who do have difficult life conditions, and say, the life conditions don't define you. You can know the unbroken even in the midst of broken. But your life doesn't have to be broken in order to know the unbroken.
Well, that's yeah. I think that's beautiful, because there is a kind of embodiment, to use the word, the dreaded word, in the way that you kind of talk, because I know that a lot of people come around you, around us, who have had broken experiences. But what I pick up from that final conversation is that it's a danger of the comparative mind to say you have to have had that level of suffering, and she has suffered and he hasn't suffered, because actually one can't tell. Yeah, it's all suffering.
Absolutely.
On a certain
It's
level,
all suffering. Yes.
Existence is all suffering.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
whether it's
correct.
that
Yes.
harshness,
Yes.
or it's the other. It's
Yes,
all
absolutely.
suffering.
And the reason that, for those listeners and those who come to our teachings, I don't focus on the level of suffering that has been experienced and the difficulties of the previous life. I don't focus on that because of this very reason. It's not a precursor. It's simply an indication that true nature is available in all conditions. And like you say, existence itself is suffering. As Buddha said, life is suffering. Why? Because there's this incessant movement within, towards and away from, towards and away from. And that in itself, all that has to be seen is that mechanism within whatever condition. And for some reason, the universe, cosmos, God gives you exactly the right conditions for you, for each of us, exactly the right conditions. For me, it was the collapse of my identity through the whole PhD situation, academic situation, because I was very identified with that. For somebody else, it's something else. So it doesn't matter in that sense.
Yeah, because like for me, it was that passage, really, I would say for 15 years of the body, really that cracked something fundamental open, because like everybody else, I was pretty attached to the body. So it does show up. I think that the main invitation from this conversation is that it shows up uniquely in everybody's life. That's the grace of it, and to realize that it's unique to every individual. How that is, why that is, we don't really know, but that's the profundity of the invitation. Yeah,
that's why it's a pathless path. That's what it means. It's not predicated on the conditions of your life or your personality. It goes beyond that. It cuts through it. But you start wherever you are, because that's the only entry point you have. That's the only life you have. That's the only experience you have.
Okay. I would just like to say, because there are a lot of people experiencing a lot of hardship in this world that's in a crazy situation at the moment, and people who haven't got the opportunity because the bombs are dropping or the horror is around, and they might not have the opportunity, or they might, who knows, to realize true nature, or to take the direct path because they're so busy, just trying to survive. So it's not a way of mitigating that, but it's, we're just talking about what we're experiencing here in the relative safety of our podcast and stuff. So the heart is open. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Amoda, I think we've sort of circled the flame as much as we can for today. I'd like to ask you a little more about your life at some point, if you would allow me to. Not today, but I think that you've got an interesting life that does shine a light. And since these podcasts tend to be more personable in some ways, I think a sort of, looking into some aspects of it. So if you'll grant me that, I've got it on tape now, so we'll see.
Of course, yes.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this podcast. We look forward to seeing you. We're trying to put out regular podcasts at the moment. Do subscribe and like these podcasts, and join the conversation. Leave a comment if it moves you in some sort of way. We'll be back as soon as possible with another conversations with Amoda Ma. Amoda Ma, thank you so much. Always a blessing speaking with you. You know how much I enjoy this.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.